of all of the things that an economic forum would be talking about, pushing for the legal age of consent to be lowered, you think would not even appear. But yet it does.
Why is that there? My name's Topher Field. Today my guest is former Australian MP George Christensen, who's keeping a close eye on the likes of Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, and the DAVOS event, which is happening in 2023 right now as we record this interview. We'll be talking about DAVOS, Central Bank Digital Currencies, and whether or not there's any truth at all to the idea that maybe these rich and powerful people actually have an interest in pedophilia. Weird. But maybe. George Christensen, thank you so much for making the time to join us. It was a bit of a time zone juggle there, but we got there and here we are. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Always a pleasure, George. Now, you're a former Australian MP and you are someone who, since retiring out of politics, you have been talking a lot about the World Economic Forum, a lot about things like Davos.
Yeah.
I thought there'd be absolutely no better person for me to speak to really, I guess, ask the question that there's a lot of people that are on the fence. They know that Davos happens. They know that a bunch of rich and powerful people fly in there. But come on, seriously, they're a bunch of unelected bureaucrats and business owners. How much of an impact does this really have in Australia? Should we actually care?
Well, Topher, it absolutely has an impact in Australia. What we have is a literal cabal of the world's elite, the rich, the powerful, the famous, that all come together for this major talk fest, and they're discussing, nonetheless, the future of the entire world. You wonder why countries that are so disparate right across the globe come up with very similar policies. It's simply because it comes out of talk fests like this. We think it's a talk fest. We think nothing's going to happen out of it. But the fact is that the political leaders here are rubbing shoulders with the major CEOs of major corporations, and they all come back, whether they're political leaders, business leaders, singing the same song sheet. And so it does have an impact on Australia. And that's why the rich and powerful out of Australia are also invited. And this is a key point. If you think that Davos and the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and all the rest of them have anything in common with the average Australian, well, just have a look at the list of people who are going over from Australia. I mean, is Kevin Rudd really someone in who understands the trials and tribulations of the average Queenslander? Is Twiggy Forrest the kind of bloke who understands what's really going on in the boondocks in Perth, or regional WA for that matter? Senator Tim Ayres is being sent over. He's the guy who infamously proposed that Australia have a death tax. Do you really think that that's the person out of all the politicians in Australia who we would be sending over there? This is a who's who of the rich and powerful. But the bizarre thing that, and I'll touch on this later and expand on it later, while it is the rich and powerful that are over there, you've got to understand that the whole ethos, the whole proposition that comes out of Davos, this great reset agenda, is one where essentially they're fusing big government and big business. So this is socialism. I don't say that word, tongue-in-cheek or anything like that. This is socialism meets corporatism. And,
Look, I'd go one step
word for that, mate. It's called fascism.
I was just about to go there, George, and you did it yourself. So Benito Mussolini, famously considered to be sort of the first fascist and the person who defined fascism before obviously Hitler then went on to embody its most extreme form. He defined fascism as a merger between government and corporations, as opposed to Marxism, which is the ownership of the corporations by the government. This is simply them working together, kind of merging into one. We saw that during COVID. The other thing that you touched on that we saw during COVID, and I think really reinforces the point that you're making, is the fact that we had all of these disparate countries coming out with very, very similar policies. And people have asked the question, how does that happen? So what you're telling us is that things like Davos are the mechanism by which all of these leaders then go back to their own countries and say, oh, I've got a great idea. And it just so happens they've all got the same idea.
So for one of the mechanisms, I guess, there are many different international talkfests, United Nations and all of its, sub-bodies being one of the key ones. The interesting thing here is that the World Economic Forum has very much tried to muscle in and create a monopoly over their agenda. And, they now have a big hand to play, a big role to play in the United Nations. There was a concordat that was signed between the two. And that concordat was criticised by both the right and the left, actually, at least the non-establishment right and the non-establishment left. There's also a big role that they've growing to play in outfits like the World Health Organization. I don't know what medical credentials that Klaus Schwab has, but there you go. So they really are trying to monopolize things. And beyond the pandemic, here's one clear, there's two clear policies that are unraveling throughout the world. Just have a look to see how many different countries around the world are piloting or trialing or exploring the concept of a central bank digital currency. Why? Why is that the case? Why are countries as disparate as Australia and Nigeria both looking at a central bank digital currency or piloting it? Why are countries right across the world all suddenly wanting to adopt digital identity systems? It doesn't matter where you go across the world. This is something that's under proposal, and I tell you why. It's because these sort of issues and these agendas are discussed at places like Davos. They are taken back by bureaucrats, by politicians, by corporate leaders who have the ears of government, and they're adopted in their home countries. That's why. So this has a big impact. People should be watching, mate, because there is crazy stuff that always comes out of Davos. Crazy stuff. And it's stuff that's not beneficial to you and me. It undermines our privacy. It undermines our freedoms. It undermines our liberties. And we've just got to keep such a watch on it and call it out. And when something crazy like there was a proposal for carbon footprint tracking, carbon footprint tracking, you could see how that could easily get legs unless people push back against it and say, no. You are not going to invade my privacy like that. So that's the kind of stuff we see come out of Davos.
Well, let me introduce you to my personal favourite children's books, and in fact, my kids' favourite children's books too. It's the Tuttle Twins series. Before my son could read, he would get me to read these to him over and over again. This set here is looking pretty beat up, and that's with good reason. They've been very well used. Now that he can read, he reads them to himself and he loves them. His favourite is actually this one here. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's all about inflation, and he's learned about what's called in the book the inflation monster. And he talks about it all the time, and he gets it. He understands what's going on. Why? Because of some jolly children's books. I've put a link into the description of this video so that you can just click on that. You'll go straight there. There's these books here that you see in my hand. There's actually books for toddlers as well that you can read. It's almost like the ABCs type books, but it's the ABCs of freedom. And then there's also books for adolescents and some teaching materials if you're homeschooling or if you're a teacher and you want to actually use these as part of a curriculum. There's actually a new book in this series that I don't have yet that talks about Australia and what happened here with the lockdowns. Yes, we've become a cautionary tale being told in children's books about the dangers of giving too much power to government. So click the link in the description and check out for yourself the full range of products that they have. I just find this to be such a deeply impressive series of books that teach some really important lessons to kids, and kids absolutely love them. Click the link in the description and have a look. Well, that's even one of the supposed benefits of a central bank digital currency is the ability to monitor what people are spending their money on and to essentially directly connect a social credit system with people's ability to spend money and what they're allowed to spend it on. Look, you've given us a couple of specifics there. You've talked about central bank digital currencies and so forth. Do we know what the agenda is for the Davos that's happening right now? Do we have an inkling of what to expect potentially out of this particular event?
Look, I think that there's always something wild that comes out of one of these, a wild proposal that catches everyone blind. But look, I expect we're going to hear a lot more about climate change. That's the hoary old favourite that always raises its head. They might give Greta another rollout. Look, I see that right now there's a lot of jumping on the whole Ukraine-Russia bandwagon. There's currently a session on, I think, about the defence of Europe at Davos, and the big PR spin is that we've ditched all the Russian oligarchs; they're no longer in attendance. Well, quite frankly, I wish that all of the oligarchs were no longer in attendance, not just the Russian ones, because the Russian oligarchs actually have zero impact over my life, your life, and probably everyone who's listening or watching's life.
Sure.
But I think that's all just spin to make the WEF look like that it's on the side of right in this, as the popular media goes on the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict. But so we'll probably hear a bit about that. I got to tell you who is really, really good at covering this. Couple of sources, Rebel News, and I got to say, hats off to Avi Yemeni for he's actually
100%.
over there on the ground, and they're going to be covering a whole heap of things. I mean, they're already, before it even started, they're already covering the fact that, again, the Swiss police have apparently been mobilised to be Klaus Schwab's henchmen. Last year they exposed the fact they were walking around with World Economic Forum police badges. I mean, how frightening, if you thought that Klaus Schwab looked like a James Bond villain, adding a private police force, or at least a commandeered public police force to his campaign, probably didn't help with that James Bond villain comparison. But you're going to hear a lot more out of Avi Yemeni, Rebel News. Another source to get the latest sort of info on what they're doing over there at Davos is Zero Hedge. It's always a go-to website of mine that has a lot of good info. But mate, you asked about what comes out of Davos, and I got to tell you, I'm not going to unravel all of this, because if you want to catch up on this topic, you'll have to read my shameless plug here, Topher. Sorry, you're going to have to read my newsletter on Friday. There was a website called News Punch that put out a story about how pedophilia had been openly promoted by the World Economic Forum, and you sort of, where's the proof of that? You have a look, and there was no proof that they had put up on their site for it. So I was a bit hesitant. I saw it getting thrown about over the interwebs and social media, but I thought I'm going to do some digging here, and I got my team to try and reach out to the person who wrote the article. We didn't get a response. That wasn't a good sign. But then again, they might not want to give away sources. They probably get bombarded by left-wing fact-checkers, and I see the left-wing fact-checkers went into overdrive on this claim. But, mate, I did find a receipt out of the World Economic Forum. So of all of the things that an economic forum would be talking about, pushing for the legal age of consent to be lowered, you think would not even appear. But yet it does.
Why is that there?
And as I said, I'm not going to say too much more on it. I've got the receipts. I'm going to show it on Friday. So
look, there's no need to be bashful.
Newsletter.
Yeah, that's right. I was about to say there's no need to be bashful. I'm going to get you to tell people how they can find you. But just before we do, you mentioned Greta Thunberg, and obviously they're going to wheel her out. Well, just the news broke last night. She's managed to get herself arrested protesting on the edge of a coal mine in Germany. Of course, the Germans are having to fire up their coal-fired power plants to make up for the interruption to the gas supply, and also for the fact that they've been shutting down nuclear plants in response to the Fukushima so-called disaster some years ago. So obviously, the consequences of their own stupidity means they have to. they have to burn coal, and the consequences of Greta Thunberg's stupidity is that she's gotten herself arrested. There is a photo, it's quite hilarious actually, there's a photo there of her being carried away by these riot police, and the look on her face, the smugness on her face. She knows very well that she benefits from being arrested at the World Economic Forum and is certainly not harmed by the optics of what's going on. But look, that's about all we have time for. But before we go, I do want you, please tell us exactly where we can find you, and I'll make sure that I put links into the description of the video as well.
Thanks, Topher. Look, nationfirst.substack.com is where people can get access to my newsletter. I'm also on YouTube. You can go there. I'm trying to migrate across to Rumble, which is more free speech. It's taking some time, but George Christensen MP, I think I still have that moniker that I can't flick off. So YouTube, if you search George Christensen, and also nationfirst.substack.com. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Topher.
Brilliant, George. I really appreciate it. And for those that may not be familiar with George Christensen's work, he's a former Australian MP turned political commentator and someone who is really staying on top of what's going on with the World Economic Forum, etc. Highly recommend his Substack to you if this is a subject that concerns you. George, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm Topher Field, and I wouldn't be able to do this without the help of my incredible supporters. So go to topherfield.net, scroll down a little bit, and you'll see there's a couple of different ways you can support me and help me to do more of this sort of work. You can buy some merchandise, you can give a one-off donation by buying me a coffee through PayPal, or you can jump onto my Subscribestar and become an ongoing supporter. All of those links are available at topherfield.net. And don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment, and make sure you join my email list as well so that I can still keep in touch with you even when I do inevitably get cancelled. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.